gaslighting as brainwashing is an overtime phenomenon. It doesn't happen in one instance. So there can be a moment where somebody attempts to gaslight you, but a gaslighting relationship and people who are suffering the gaslight effect are in it over time.
Yeah.
And time, the gaslighter is certain and insistent and clever and exquisitely tuned into you.
Right.
Are people born gaslighters?
Mm-hmm.
And people are not born gaslighters, right? Gaslighters are have come to it through either social learning or through wounds in childhood that are then dealt with by writing themselves in a way that is blaming of someone else or destroying somebody else or trying to. And or sometimes gaslighters just happen into it and it works.
Right. So there's a social learning possibility angle to this as well. But here's some feedback. So your book is written from primarily a woman's perspective. So the gaslighter, a noun, is male. And so as a male, I want to say, wait a minute, there are women gaslighters too. I know you know that for sure, but I just want to state it clearly. And then the other thing is just that I'm nervous about using a noun, to take a human being and make them into a thing versus describing the behavior that's so dysfunctional.
Yes, and I mean to be describing the role.
Okay, good.
Role, not the person, because of course you're right. It's not the sum and substance of a person to be described as a gaslighter. You're a human being who is engaging in this kind of behavior to control the moment or to keep your person completely dependent on you or to be the decision maker for the two of you all the time.
Right. So there were so many models you educated me on that are new to me that I'd like you to mention a few that I want our listeners to grab your book and your recovery guide, especially if they have someone in their life where they feel like whenever they're interacting with them, they're thinking, am I crazy? I could have sworn we agreed to this and now they're saying I never did, or a million other examples, right? And so you talk about stages of gaslighting that I think is particularly important. You mentioned different categories of gaslighter: the glamour gaslighter, the good person, good guy gaslighter, or the intimidator So share a few nuggets with our listeners, please.
Sure, thank you. So the reason that I talked about stages is I saw them over 30 years. I would see someone come in and tell me about an instance, like for instance, you go to the movies with somebody and they tell you, my God, like, do you have a problem with going to the movies with me tonight? You left me sitting in the seat. You were at the popcorn stand for so long. And you think, it's a little weird. I was just buying popcorn. I don't have a problem with him. Like, okay, whatever. He's a really nice guy. He's cute. We're going to the movies. And the next time something like that happens, he says, you do have a problem with me, don't you? Just like when you were in the movie theater. You really don't want to be close to me. You're ambivalent about this relationship, aren't you? And you think, what's with this guy? And then he insists and he persists and he is certain that you are ambivalent in everything that you do that gives him evidence that you might be that person ambivalently connected to him. He says that same thing again. And you begin at that point to believe him. And so when you go from to second guess yourself,
right.
Let me say that, to second guess yourself. So when you go from thinking that's a silly comment to second guessing yourself, you're traveling through stage 1 into stage 2. And then in stage 2, once you are second guessing yourself, you still are rooted in your own reality, but you're defending yourself constantly. I'm not ambivalent. I couldn't wait to come home tonight. I couldn't wait to get back to you in that seat. I couldn't wait to see you. I'm not at all ambivalent. I don't want to spend my holiday with someone else. I want to spend it with you. And he's arguing back and forth, but if. And you're spending a lot of mind share wondering who's right.
Mm.
Wait, I thought, who's right in this argument? It's true that I was away for a long time, but I'm not ambivalent. And so rather than thinking about how you're feeling in the relationship, rather than thinking, why am I constantly arguing the same argument? Or rather than engaging in this power struggle, you are then moving through, if you stay in it and you don't get out of the power struggle, you're moving through stage 2 to stage 3. So stage 3 in gaslighting is when you really are standing in his shoes or in their shoes. You're standing in the shoes of the gaslighter, the person taking on that role, and you see yourself the way they do. I am ambivalent. Like, why do I always do that to him? Like, he is right. I'm really ambivalent about him. And so that's a progression that happens over time. And it happens not because of the way you feel about somebody or are you certain or you're ambivalent, but because of the insistence on reality. And so it happens about who you are as a human being, the attributes you have, the way you look, the way you think, the way you make decisions, the way where you put things, how people see you. He can glom onto, or they can glom onto anything.
Right. So what I loved about your book is not only you defining stage 1, 2, and 3, but you gave examples like you just did about the popcorn and the movie, and you give alternatives for how to protect yourself, like how to disengage, how not to merge, how not to fall into the empathy trap. Just give our listeners a little taste of some of the practical suggestions.
I'm glad you asked me about that, because one of the things that I like about doing this work is really being helpful on the ground. And in order to be helpful on the ground, sometimes people need words, they need tools, they need things to say when they have the courage to say them. And so, of course, that's another set of tools. But for example, if somebody is arguing with you and you are in this back and forth power struggle, in this conversation that doesn't go anywhere, am I right? Are you right? Is he right? At some point, a simple opting out statement like, you may be right, but right now I'm done with this conversation. Or we are going to have to agree to disagree.
I love that one. I do that one.
I do want to talk about this, but not right now, because when our emotions are heated, we're not going to get very far. Or we've been having this back and forth for so long, we're just not getting anywhere. Let's pick up the conversation at another time. Or simply, I don't want to talk about this anymore.
Yep. And my work is called, freedom of mind. And I say it's your mind, you should control it. And your work is all about this topic. And in fact, I talk about how we need to rewire our own brains so we have different reactions. We can evolve to a future us that's healthier. And so we're really on the same page completely, in my opinion. That this is really about us being in our bodies, knowing our emotions, knowing our beliefs and our values, and also having a support system with people who truly love us and know us, who can reality test with us and go, you know what, that's not you. Like, huh?
Exactly. And you're so right about the support system, because sometimes it is just that person who says to you, you're doing what? Or he said what? That wakes you up to some another reality. One of the what you just said just is leading me to share what one of the things that is so hard about detaching from stage 2, from stage 3, and from the gaslight effect to begin with, or in its entirety. And that is the idea that you may have to withdraw without the other person thinking well of you. And I wonder about this in the life of cults, whether people are stuck in that way too. That if you assert yourself, if you have independent thought, then you're risking the good graces and the esteem of your leader or maybe other people in the cult. And I know for patients, um, year after year coming in saying, I can't stand it. I can't stand that he thinks that way of me. And
Mm-hmm.
I can't, he says that I'm forgetful, but I'm not. And until I can convince him, I could never leave because I couldn't live with his thinking about me that way.
Yeah. So my reaction to your question is certainly if you're born or raised in an authoritarian cult, religious or political or therapy or whatever, you need to get the cult out of your head. Like I talked about a pseudo self that's created as a clone of the cult leader or the ideology, that coming out is really realizing that the real me, you know, doesn't like that or likes art or wants to go to college and learn, even if it means my parents rejecting me and shunning me and my whole community turning on me, or I realize I'm gay and my community thinks that I'm defective and I can't live in a toxic environment. So it's crucial for a former cult member, especially born or raised, to really dissect, take out the good stuff from the cult experience and the cult identity, but really recreate your sense of self based on who you want to be with a healthy future. And in my case, I was recruited into the Moonies at 19. So for me, I had a baseline. But when I first got out, I needed a lot of help to remember who I was before.
What do you
I
mean
needed
by
people to tell me stories and show me pictures and videos and take me places, because I had believed I had a terrible childhood and my family was evil and I was suicidal, and it was like not true. It was just total BS. But as a cult leader, I realized this is a systematic part of the brainwashing to break down who you are to create this new dissociated identity that's dependent and obedient.
Yeah, I mean, that is just fascinating. When you talk about needing to come back to yourself, wonder uh, if it's similar for people in gaslighting relationships where what is required, what's necessary is to get away. Even
Yeah,
it's for a day.
absolutely.
To
Yeah,
get away, to talk to other people, as you
you
said
have
before,
to.
who love you, who care about you, who with whom you feel safe, who are not distorting your reality,
Mhm.
so that you can have a back and forth and ground yourself in what perhaps used to be your reality, or certainly even in that moment. What do you feel? What are you thinking? What do you think about what just happened?
Yeah, and it's almost impossible when you're in the thick of it,
Mhm.
whether it's a relationship, a job that you're dependent on for money, or in the midst of a religious organization where you're constantly getting reinforcement. It's almost impossible to reclaim your power
Yep,
because you need some
absolutely.
bandwidth.
You have to get
Mhm.
And
out.
so, and I talk about a 4-step reality testing strategy. And guess what the first step is? What you just said: get away,
Yeah.
turn off the phone, go on vacation, go camping, go in the woods, listen to music, dance. Just give yourself sleep, give yourself good food and exercise and such, because once you have that, then you can begin a process of learning. And as you said earlier, another critically important point: when humans are emotionally activated and aroused, especially with fear or anger or something really intense, our frontal cortex goes offline. So we're
Yeah.
not going to be as capable
That's right.
of developing a perspective and good decision making and reality testing and such, right?
Sure, because we're gripped by fear.
interesting about mind control cults is the longer you're in, the less it works because it's so not connected to reality and all the failed prophecies and the more negative experiences you have, you suppress them, but they're still in your mind. And eventually you get to a point where people will say to me, I don't care if I'm going to hell. I can't stand it here one more minute. I just can't stand it.
Yeah.
You know?
And that's
Anyway.
actually very similar to what people say when they've had enough of the gaslighting relationship, where they say, I know I put up with this before. I don't even like myself anymore. I just can't stand this one more minute.
Yeah. It becomes toxic and you know it. And then so the question is, what's within your power to do?
Yeah.
And people often need help to create an exit strategy.
Yes.
And often it's about breaking it into smaller pieces, like taking time out to get away to think, and consulting a financial advisor or, going to a therapist
Right.
or a coach
Right.
that has helped other people successfully navigate. It's so vital. Robin, I'm so thrilled to know your work. And for me, I've been just trying to learn over these decades. And I got to a point where I was saying to my clients, think about emotions as your friends. You want to listen to them, but you don't want to be controlled by them. And I like the parts thing of imagining a big, conference table and you're the CEO and all your different parts that have different feelings. A lot of my clients are so traumatized. They have parts that have been isolated or fragmented off.
Yes.
And they're working on automatic pilot, thinking that they're still a 5-year-old who is sexually abused when they're 25 years old and have a lot of resources they didn't have as a 5-year-old. But getting permission to access that part and listen.
Yeah. Well, giving yourself the permission and also knowing that you have the opportunity to be what we call an emotion scientist, to be curious about your emotions, to know that there's information that you're getting from each emotion, to be a learner, not a knower, to have to know that you can, it's not the expression I'm looking for, you're always at the growing edge. You're always.
Yeah, and I love Adam Grant's book, Think Again, and it really is a call to be open to changing your mind, separate your ego from your beliefs, expose yourself to other points of view that are out of the box of anything you're familiar with.
That's right. And trust that you can take care of your own emotions if you're uncomfortable. Okay, so you feel uncomfortable. What can you do with that? And those are the skills of emotional intelligence. And those skills are vital in freeing yourself from gaslighting, to be able to manage yourself in that moment where you can't really think straight. Maybe all you can do is breathe. Maybe all you can do is leave the field for a moment so that you can gather yourself, so that you can think, wait a minute, do I really think that? Why not?
Yeah, so valuable. And as you were talking, I couldn't help but think about people who are numbing themselves out through drugs or alcohol or zoning out into video gaming where they don't have to think or be real and they can pretend they're somebody else and disappear. But then when they're done with that, you're still you.
You're still, and if you have a disposition about those emotions and that difficult moment, that they're negative and bad and it was horrible, then you lose the opportunity to learn something about yourself,
and to be your best friend.
and to be your best friend, and to have compassion for yourself.
Yes. So good boundaries, overcoming the urge to merge, not feeling like you have to convince the other person that you know who you are if they're so sure, and basically getting help, because in the end you want to not be in a toxic relationship at home or at work. If you have a boss, let's talk about bosses who are gaslighting people and saying, stuff that isn't true or talking behind people's backs.
Yes. It's it's a tough place to be, to acknowledge that you're in a gaslighting relationship at work, and especially if the gaslighter is your boss, worse than a colleague, because you may feel like there's no way to shift it because you're dependent on your job, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you're not dependent financially, most people who work for somebody certainly want to be in there well thought of. So they're
Right.
dependent on their boss or reputation or maybe a recommendation. And
Right.
so if you are in a relationship with your boss where either he is lying or she is lying to you, or avoiding responsibility, or for example, you say, wait a minute, I'm sorry, I don't have what you're asking me for, but I remember the timeline a little bit differently. And your boss says, well, aren't you going through the changes right now? Like, you're in menopause. So like when that happens for you, your memory is not what it used to be, is it? And you walk out of there and you think, you know what, he's right. My memory's not what it used to be. That still doesn't mean you got it wrong about the timeline.
Right.
So, in that situation, what do? Do you go back in and do you say, you're gaslighting me? Well, I don't think so. At least
Right.
not in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you do if you feel like you're constantly being undermined? You ask for promotion, your boss changes the subject, you, but but still in glad handing, you walk out of the office. You feel like he really likes me, thinks I'm a good guy, but he still didn't talk to you about your promotion, right? And instead left you thinking there was something wrong with you for asking about
Mm.
it. And the one thing that I encourage people to do all the time, write it down.
Yep,
Um,
exactly. Right.
Yep.
you're
Everything
going
down.
to your boss's office, you send him an email, so glad we have a meeting today, looking forward to discussing X.
Yep.
And then in the meeting, you let your boss know, I like to document everything. I'm
Yes,
going to send you an
that's a
email when
good
we're
one.
done. And just to sum up what we said and to make sure that I understood things correctly.
Mhm.
And so there's no blaming
Yep.
of anybody. You're taking responsibility, and then do it, and then do it. So that then the next time, if you're accused of, verbal pivot, of having the wrong timeline, you can just say, well, maybe you changed, maybe you communicated something to me in between. However, the last time we met, this is what we said.
Yeah, that's reality testing strategy 101. Write it down.
Write it
And
down.
and that's another thing that I find so helpful for my clients when they get out is they have memories starting to surface.
Mm.
Write them down.
Yes. And write down the conversation itself,
Mhm.
because in that little snippet that I shared with you, I was
Mm-hmm.
talking about the timeline. And then suddenly we were talking about my menopause. Like, there's
Mm-hmm.
something wrong with that. That's a pivot in a conversation,
Mm-hmm.
independent of the content of what he was asking me for.
Right.
And I would say limit your interactions with the person who is gaslighting you. Um, Notice what are triggers for that person and just try to avoid them if you can. Surround yourself with people who you feel psychologically safe with,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and think about whether it's bad enough that you think that you need to leave your job.
Mm-hmm.
Because often, in freeing yourself from a gaslighting relationship, you will have to make a sacrifice.
Yes. Yeah, it's not so clear, and a lot of people are so afraid of the unfamiliar
Mm.
that they'll stay in a dysfunctional,
Yes.
toxic, job
Right.
or relationship without making the effort to find out what are my other
Mhm.
options.
Right. Right. And the other piece in the workplace is when you're working on a project, if there's any way to bring somebody else in so that you have outside validation and corroboration of your
Mm.
perspective, and also
Mm-hmm.
using your good friends. Maybe I'm repeating myself now, but it's
Yeah, no, You can't repeat it too many times, because what I've been saying, especially coming back to the pandemic and the social isolation that resulted, because we were told, don't hug and wear masks and don't kiss and all of those other kinds of things, like we did anyway. But it's really important in real life to make efforts to re-nurture real relationships, build real relationships where you're not on screens and you're doing other things than work that is satisfying and illuminating and expanding. Whether it's learning a new dance, learning a new language, writing poetry, doing artwork, people are multifaceted, and we can sometimes get into a groove where we think just career, 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 I need to do this track. And it's not going to serve us, especially what appears to be this new reality that we're living with AI. Now, all of a sudden, the age of specialization has flipped to the generalists, the people who know philosophy, the people who know art and culture and music are going to be in the advantage, right? For being able to put systems together instead of breaking things down into atomistic parts. What sayeth thou?
Well, it's so interesting that you talk about AI. Because I just yesterday wrote an article that I published in Medium on are you being gaslighted is AI gaslighting you? And there was an article some time ago in the Times where somebody was having this exchange with this AI bot, or however you speak about the AI machine.
Yep.
And even though the AI isn't a sentient being and may not intentionally be gaslighting you, if you're having a gaslighting communication come your way, it does give you pause. If it makes sense.
Yep.
If it makes sense. And I think that if it makes logical sense, well, you can't possibly love her because you didn't say that, or whatever the lines were.
Oh, you were talking about Kevin Roose
Yes,
of the New York Times in Sydney, who's trying to convince him that his wife doesn't really love him, and
that's exactly right.
he should love her,
Right.
Sydney instead. And it's like, what?
Right.
Yeah, no, it's clear that AI is not sentient. However, it's relying on data, many of which is incorrect, and so there are what's called hallucinations, which means things are coming out of nowhere that don't make sense, but in sentences that supposed to make sense. And again, the issue is, wait a minute, I'm in charge. These are computers. My reality matters.
Right. The possibilities for gaslighting are just enormous, with that when you can manipulate reality to look like one thing when it's actually another. So it's wonderful that we have technology. If we didn't, I couldn't even be here with you right now. But but I'm a little terrified.
Right. So I would like to find a language interaction with you where, because in my mind, when I think of that, I think of deep fakes. I think of fourth generation psychological warfare deliberately aimed at creating chaos and polarizing people against each other. So for me, I still have this undue influence, brainwashing, mind control frame in my head. And I'm wanting to incorporate your language and your model. So I'm sure it will be a process. There are models that one can use to reality test.
Well, what I think is important about the gaslight effect, and the way I think about it, is that it's really all about what's going on inside of you. If you're paying attention, then you will have all the answers. You may not have all the tools. You need to go get tools. You may not have the social support that you need, because you can't often do it on your own. But you have your integrity that you used to know about that you can reclaim. You have the way you see the world that you can find if you just take a step back. You have all the information that your emotions can give you if you just are willing to listen. The secret to happiness: spend more time with chickens and less time with idiots.